Joe on Joe is the only podcast where Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello, all you listeners out there. This is Joe Slepsky, and welcome back to Joe on Joe Illustrated. That's right. This is the patron-exclusive podcast. Well, I should say typically the patron-exclusive podcast, where I go over every issue of G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, the comic book, in sequential order, page by page, panel by panel. But you know, every 5 issues that we cover over on the Patreon page, we like to share with the main audience. So that's what you're getting today. We are covering G.I. Joe issue number 40. You know what happens in this one. It's got that dynamic roadblock cover by Mike Zeck. The bombs go off that start the fireworks, that will become Cobra Island. Spoiler alert, everybody. And most importantly, we get introduced to someone that this show absolutely adores in animated form, Shipwreck. Shipwreck's first appearance is today, guys, and I could not be more excited. Before we start, here's a word from our sponsor. Hey, listeners, if you're anything like me, all apologies to your family. I'm just kidding. It's likely that they made you this way. No, I'm talking about that I'm always looking for more G.I. Joe content, and I think I found it. Stop what you're doing. Okay, don't stop listening to this podcast. Okay, to multitask and go to Facebook/Special Mission Force. Brian Wilkins is curating all kinds of wonderful, nostalgic G.I. Joe content, including new pics from his fantastic Instagram page at Special Mission Force. On his Instagram, he's taking photos of Joes out in the wild, in the real world, doing stuff. For me, the 2 things that stand out the most are his variety of characters that he takes pictures of, and like the depth of field in these pictures. It's just a wonderful job of directing focus for you. I think you really will enjoy his work. So like him on Facebook, follow him on Instagram and Twitter, and get ready for his website, specialmissionforce.com. He's a name to watch in the G.I. Joe game, so get on board now. Now back to the show. And we're back. Remember, go online. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Joe on Joe Pod. And then please go to patreon.com/Joe on Joe Pod and check out the show. See what we have to offer. For only $3 a month, you can help sponsor the show and keep it going. And you get full access to every issue of Joe on Joe Illustrated that we've done. So you can hear all the breakdowns of every issue of every comic. And the plan is to keep on trucking for a long time. So please, I hope you guys go over there and check it out. So we're going to start with our segment where I go into the past and see what other comic books were on the shelf the month of publication. In this case, G.I. Joe 40 hit the stands in October of 1985. So the segment
you were saying
is going to look at all the other comic books, in this case from DC Comics in October 1985. This is a bad month to be a Supergirl, everyone. I did not know that these 2 books came out the same month. First of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This is, or should I say, the Kandorian snare beast in the room. This is the death of Supergirl, Crisis number 7. Possibly the most iconic, one of the most iconic covers of all time. Definitely of the modern age. It's Superman, George Perez cover, beautiful George Perez cover, and Superman cradling the dead Kara Zor-El in his arms after she very valiantly and heroically fought back the Anti-Monitor's forces to allow the rest of the heroes to escape. And he's bracketed by this this pantheon of heroes behind him from all the different dimensions. And he's just mourning. You guys absolutely know the cover. It has been parodied so many places. And I believe that actually this in itself wasn't the first time that this pose was struck. I think this was a kind of a classic comics pose throughout the decades. But this is the cover. This is the version that hit with everyone. This is the one where every time it's referenced from here on out, it's always referencing Crisis, and it's great. I've seen cosplayers do it. It's just awesome. I've seen it done seriously. I've seen it done parodying wise. It's great. And the comic itself is super poignant and wonderful. Basically, DC knew that they were going to be rebooting Superman. And within the pages of the reboot, eventually they would get around to introducing a Supergirl, but initially there was not going to be a Supergirl for quite some time. So they had to give her a proper send-off, and I believe they did for sure. That's Crisis number 7. But now this is what I'm talking about, where I didn't even ever realize these two books came out at the same time. The same month was the Legion annual, Legion Superheroes annual number 1 from the Baxter series, beautiful Keith Giffen cover. It's Who Shot Laurel Kent? Well, Laurel Kent was a Supergirl stand-in for the Legion of Superheroes. She was technically a descendant of Clark Kent, and she, if memory serves, she gets hit with a kryptonite bullet in this issue. But I've never put that together, that they killed her off the same month that they killed off Supergirl. That's absolutely crazy. You guys might be familiar with the other Supergirl cast, dupe lookalike, I would say, and that would be Andromeda, and that's from the 90s era of Legion. But before Andromeda, there was Laurel Kent, and she was exactly that. She was a Kent. I think she had steel hard skin. She wasn't a full-on Supergirl or Superman in powers, but this is the episode that they kill her. That's really kind of crazy. I don't mean to laugh at someone's demise, but I never knew, literally till right as we're recording this, that those books came out the same month. I love it. For anyone reading Doomsday Clock, you know that there's a backup story that's kind of running through there, much like Alan Moore did in the original, using the pirates in the comic books and those adventures. There's a Nathaniel Dusk backup that's running throughout the pages of Doomsday Clock that Jeff Johns is writing. Nathaniel Dusk Volume 2 number 1 also hit the stands this month. So if that's giving you any interest, if it's piquing your interest, you should go seek this book out. I have a feeling that once DC finishes telling the story of Doomsday Clock, they're going to put all this Nathaniel Dusk stuff back into print if it hasn't been solicited already. I didn't look before sitting down and record this stuff, so that's something to consider if you're trying to seek out back issues. But Nathaniel Dusk Volume 2 number 1 hit the stands. The Red Tornado miniseries wrapped up this month. It was a 4-issue miniseries, and the notable thing about it's okay. It cemented Tornado's family life with Treya, the little girl that he adopted from a Justice League adventure. She was an orphan, and then he tried to live an idyllic suburban life. I don't know what it is about androids wanting to live an idyllic suburban life, but what's cool about this one is it's written by Kurt Busiek. It's some of his early work, and I recommend it highly. I believe after this Red Tornado, if he wasn't already, I think he goes over to Marvel and writes on Power Man and Iron Fist. But Kurt Busiek's Red Tornado miniseries wrapped up this month. And here it is, the big important issue, Flash number 350. This would be the last regular series issue for Barry Allen, the Flash, before he passes away in next month's, spoiler alert, Crisis on Infinite Earths number 8. It's the big one, 350. So Flash had gone through that year-long trial for murdering Professor Zoom, because Zoom was going to kill his fiance. And then during the course of the trial, he realizes that I think didn't the prosecutor, wasn't that Iris in disguise? There was something about Iris being in the courtroom in disguise, because it turns out Iris is actually still alive. She's not dead. She's been living in the future. She comes back from the future, and she brought Barry with her to go live in the future. And this gives him a proper happy ending send off. It's crazy. I mean, it's Silver Age craziness, and it's a whole lot of fun. And the send off lasts approximately 25 days until Crisis 8 hits. But he could have lived in the future for a good number of years. In fact, we know that he did, because he lived in the future long enough to give birth, or to grow and raise the Tornado Twins, which were a part of the Legion. So Barry did have some good years in the future before he died. But in our terms, he had about 25 days until the Crisis 8 hit. And so that's it for DC Comics.
You were saying?
And now let's go over to Marvel and see what's in the bag for Marvel. We haven't checked in on Thor in a few months, and Simonson's Thor, it's Thor number 360, continues its legendary run. And this Thor is determined to go rescue all the human souls that were trapped in hell, that got trapped there from their battle against the Casket of Ancient Winners. And this is just a general blanket statement. If you've never read the Walter Simonson Thor stuff, do yourself a serious favor and get it. They did an omnibus. I think you can get it for like $75 or something on Amazon, $100 maybe. It is so worth it. It will be the best value of your money, comic book wise, that you're ever going to spend. Get on comics, whatever it is. Get the Thor stuff by Walter Simonson. I promise you, if you loved anything about Ragnarok or liked anything about the first 2 Thor movies, it is all Simonson. Ton of Kirby too, of course, but mostly Simonson, and it is dynamite. Another big book this month is X-Men 198. This is part 2 to the Storm Forge Life, Death, a Love Story saga. Part 1 was like, I think it was like 186 or something like that, 184, so about a year earlier. And it told the budding romance between Storm and Forge. And even though Forge was the one who made the machine, which cut her off from her powers, and she was so tied into Mother Nature and Earth that cutting her off from her powers was like crippling her. And most importantly, these are drawn by the brilliant Barry Windsor Smith. And the artwork is just stunning, especially for a monthly comic book. Like, it is just absolute dynamite stuff. So Uncanny X-Men 198, anyone that comes into the Golden Apple and says, hey, I need a good Storm book, this and part 1 are absolutely the first 2 books that I look to see if we even have in stock. We sell them all the time because this is a book. If you love Storm, if you like the X-Men, this is an absolute book that needs to be in your collection. Speaking of Simonson, The Eternals #1. Now, this is volume 2. This was a 12-issue miniseries that they did. So it doesn't have that Kirby stamp of approval on it. Sal Buscema did the pencils. Peter Gillis wrote it. Al Gordon on inks, but Walter Simonson did the cover, and it is a strong cover. Icarus is kind of punching his way out. You got Circe on there. You got some Celestials on there. The reason I bring this up is the Eternals are the latest in the, hey, what's Marvel going to make a movie about next game? You know, for a long time, people were like, oh, it's going to be the Inhumans, and then they ended up doing that TV show, which was god-awful. So I don't know what's going to come of the Eternals, but they are on the radar. So this is their 12-issue miniseries. The first volume was actually a regular ongoing series, and that was all by Kirby, or most of it was by Kirby. I think that someone took it over towards the end. But this is the 12-issue miniseries, and it's okay. It's not great, but you know, the Eternals and the Inhumans are all offshoot. Like, they're all like pale shadows of the Thor stuff that Kirby was doing. So it's like each iteration I lost more and more interest in. So we'll see how, you know. Now, as a movie, Marvel could absolutely do magic with it. Look what they did with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So I am not against them doing a movie on it. I'm just saying, as existing, not a huge Eternals fan. However, I am a big fan of the Vision and Scarlet Witch. And their second miniseries started this month. Issue #1 was on the stands. And this is another 12-issue series where the Vision wants to live in the suburbs and have peace and quiet, which, if you've read the current Vision series, is kind of the same premise. However, not taking anything away. The current Vision series was absolutely fantastic. This older one's a little more hokey because it just is. But it's a lot of fun. That's something you guys should check out. Over in Power Pack, issue #15, it's a crossover with Thor where Beta Ray Bill shows up to hang out with the Power Kids. Beta Ray Bill, of course, being the Chimelian, I think it was a chameleon alien, who got a hold of Thor's hammer and took on the power of Thor because he was also just as worthy as Thor was. He wasn't in the movies, but his hammer was. The hammer that Thor forged in the Avengers Infinity War, that's Stormbreaker. And Stormbreaker is the hammer that Beta Ray Bill used, and Beta Ray Bill's face was on the pillar of champions during the movie Thor Ragnarok when Thor went to the planet, the Battle World planet, to fight for the Collector's. Or I guess it wasn't. He was the Games Master. He was the Collector's brother. Sakaar, the planet Sakaar. Yeah. So it was like there was a giant head bust, like a Mount Rushmore kind of thing, where they were carving one of the Hulk's face because he was such a champion. Beta Ray Bill's face was on there too. He's a fantastic character. He crossed over with Power Pack. Now, the connection with these two, you might be like, well, it's a kid's book. Well, it was written by Louise Simonson, and her husband is Walter Simonson, and Walter Simonson created and was doing Thor at this time. So there was a whole lot of Thor crossover between Power Pack and Thor and X Factor, which the Simonsons both worked on. And Louise Simonson is an absolute brilliant writer. She is So talented, both the Simonson. I should just do a podcast called The Simonson Factor and just call it a day, really. So Power Pack 15, Beta Ray Bill, check that out. And that's going to be it for Marvel Comics.
You were saying?
Now, let's see what was in the movie theater this month. Last month, if you guys recall from last episode, was a little bit light in the theaters. And I would say that this month kind of continues the trend, but the quality, I think, goes up quite a bit. I say that, and then the very first title out of my mouth right now is going to be the movie Commando. Hello. Commando's pretty amazing. Obviously Schwarzenegger, and what's her name? Alyssa Milano was his daughter, Rae Dawn Chong. Now, the great thing about this movie, a little bit of trivia, which probably a lot of comic book people know by now, but there was a long time people didn't realize it. The movie Commando was written by Jeff Loeb, who went on to write in comic books and did things like Batman: A Long Halloween, and is now the head of Marvel Television Productions. So Commando, Marvel Comics connection, there you go for you. Now, the other movie on October 4th was Jagged Edge. This was with Glenn Close, Jeff Bridges. It was one of those like courtroom drama thrillers about murder and sex and all that stuff. It's a tight movie. I haven't seen this in a long time, but I remember this is a solid flick. Of course, it's got the dude, and Glenn Close is amazing. On October 11th, two fun movies. One is Silver Bullet, which is the Stephen King werewolf movie. It's got a little bit of a renaissance. It's not a great movie, but it is actually a lot of fun. There's a lot of great people in it. It's Corey Haim, Gary Busey, Terry O'Quinn, Locke from Lost. Lawrence Tierney's in it. Like there's some serious people in it, and it really is a lot of fun. I did watch it relatively recently. It's been getting a lot of play on cable, and check out Silver Bullet if you can. Give it another shot. It's not great. Like it's not a great film by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a good time. The other awesome movie that came out on October 11th is Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins. So Remo Williams is based on a series of novels called The Destroyer. And actually Marvel did some The Destroyer comic book adaptations a little bit in the 80s. And what's fun and funny and kind of cringeworthy is when they decided to do this. So Remo is like an American dude who gets trained to be a ninja by like an Asian sensei, a little bit like the Snake Eyes G.I. Joe connection, right? There's absolutely an influence here. I think even Larry Hama would agree. He must have read the Destroyer novels. Like they were big in the 70s. There had to be some influence, right? Except when they were making this movie, they decided to cast Joel Grey as the Asian sensei, Chun, who trains Fred Ward. So this like might be like one of the last true like, oh, and he got a Golden Globe for it, like Yellowface, I would say, like really kind of unabashed. You know, Hollywood did it a lot back in the day, much to their awkward. I'm looking at you, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and he plays an Asian dude, and Joel Grey, not Asian, not even remotely close. Anyway, moving on. October 18th, The Reanimator. Very fun movie. It's sci-fi horror comedy. It's based on the H.P. Lovecraft story where the Herbert West, the doctor, he learns how to reanimate dead people, and it's like a tongue-in-cheek comedy. I think a lot of people don't get that when they first, at least back in the day, they didn't get it when they first saw Reanimator. I think since then it's been properly classified as kind of a horror comedy. It's really well done. It's a very funny movie. They did a bunch of sequels to it, none of which really were kind of caught that cultish awesomeness that the first Reanimator did. If you've never seen Reanimator, guys, give it a shot. You know, it's not for everyone, but it is a lot of fun. And literally, like, there's one other movie. Well, like, one other movie came out the next week called like Twice in a Lifetime. No idea what that is. Gene Hackman, and that's it.
Joe and Joe listeners know that I love comic books, G.I. Joe, pop culture, and my wife and dogs are pretty great too. I also love learning how people get to where they're at and where they're going. All of that comes together over at the Dreamer Comics podcast, except for my family stuff. That'd be really weird. Omar Spahi interviews someone from the comic industry every episode, and they break down the journey that creator took to get from reading comics to creating them. Comic luminaries like Jim Valentino, Ross Ritchie, Kyle Higgins, and so many more can be found at DreamerComicsPodcast.com or find them anywhere you get your podcasts. Everyone has a dream. Learn how to make yours a reality.
So it's a light month, but I think some really, really quality stuff in it. And now it is time to jump into G.I. Joe number 40.
Soon the whole world will bow to Destro and Cobra.
Well, not if Mike Zeck has anything to say about it, because Mike Zeck did a super dope cover. It is Roadblock with his Ma Deuce just absolutely blazing away. Now, you guys know the cover. You know that the gun takes up most of it. You see the spent shells kind of smoking out the side of it. But I'm going to make a connection here. So, now we saw last month, or, last episode, I say last month, but last episode, we were looking at the cover to 39, right? And I had noticed, honestly, for real, for the first time when I really looked at the cover, that Roadblock is behind Stalker on that cover. And we agreed that it was gung-ho, even though he's not wearing the right hat. And he's behind Stalker in this pose. If you then apply that to this cover, and he's also kind of colored bluish, right? If you apply that to this cover, it's kind of like a push-in. It's kind of like a camera push-in on... Now, we know it's a different setting. We know that, setting of the issue, they moved up to New Orleans. They're not in Rio Lindo anymore and all that stuff. I get that, guys. But thematically, if you're drawing, if you're looking at the covers from month to month, the previous month, he was in the background, and now Roadblock has graduated to the front cover. And that bluish tint that he had on him is actually the blue background of this cover. I have zero idea or knowledge if they intended to do this on purpose. But, sometimes... great coincidences make great synchronicity, I guess. I don't even know if that's a thing. And I love it. I think it works totally great if you're reading it monthly and you go issue to issue to issue. So it's awesome. I love Mike Zeck. I love the Mike Zeck consternation face, and this is another one of them. All the wrinkles in the forehead, like Mike Zeck never met a forehead wrinkle he didn't like, and we are all better for it. Absolutely great. Just absolutely fantastic. John Beatty did the inks on it. It's dynamite. So there you go. Cover G.I. Joe number 40.
Yo, Joe!
And the issue is titled Hydrofoil by Larry Hama, script, Rod Wiggum pencils, Andy Mashinsky inks, Joe Rosen lettering, George Russo's coloring, Denny O'Neil editor, and Jim Shooter editing in chief. We open with a couple dragonflies, and they're heading towards a like a paddle boat, like an industrial sized paddle boat. And on that paddle boat, we get our very first glimpse at the G.I. Joe Air Sea Battle Platform, which was a fantastic toy. And so this is the introduction of it in the comic books. I had this. I hope everyone listening had this toy. I really loved this toy. It was just a marvel of awesome playsetness. Like, it was big enough, obviously, for a base, but because they wanted to make it mobile, it had the legs that went up and down, had the missiles and the automatic machine gun. It had a landing spot for your helicopter. It had a working winch. It had ladders off the side, so you could actually place it in water. If you listened to last week's Joe on Joe, you guys heard us talking with Troy Smith, and we were saying that you could technically have put this on like floating like floats in your pool, so this could literally have floated on the water in your swimming pool. Like, I love this. There was the weapon area, like you could store your weapons. There was the communication section. I think there was a brig in it, not like a full on. Wasn't there something like you could handcuff somebody, or there was some kind of brig attachment to it? Oh, and the front folded out, so you could like put it away for storage, but then oh man, everything was cool about this toy. And it actually had cleats or bits that you could wrap which we're going to get to in the next page, that you could wrap your hook from your dragonflies on. And from a marketing perspective, what a brilliant idea, because they marketed it as to say it takes two, and it's in this comic too, it takes two dragonflies to carry this thing. So then as a toy, you would say to your parents, hey, let's get another dragonfly because I need to have two dragonflies to carry this. It's so smart, so brilliant. It didn't work on me. I never got two dragonflies, but I can see how that would work in a lot of cases. Now, having said that, here's what's disturbing about this picture. One, not the picture itself. Rod Wiggum, you did a marvelous job. I've said it before on these episodes. he might be my quintessential G.I. Joe artist, not just because he's the guy that was drawing it when I first came in. We're nearing where I first joined reading on a monthly basis, but that his style is very grounded and very real and very realistic, and he always puts in the backgrounds. He always gives you enough atmosphere in almost every panel to just ground this series, and it works for me. But here's what's troubling about this is whoever's flying, it was Airborne's flying the second helicopter. He says, looks heavy. Can we lift it with just 2 dragonflies, Wild Bill? And Wild Bill's response is not, of course, we're tested. Or, no, he says, can't tell till we play out the winches. So do you guys not know if you can carry it with 2? Shouldn't this have been tested before you actually deployed it? Isn't that something that the military would have known? I'm hoping he's joking, but I don't get the feeling that he's joking. I get the feeling that they're flying by the seat of their pants here, which just scares me a little bit.
Yo, Joe!
Now, if you remember last issue, we left the Joes that were leaving Rio Lindo, which were, who was it? Recondo and Roadblock, Ripcord, Stalker. They also had Dr. Burkhart with them, and Gung Ho. They thought they were going to go home, and they were told they had to divert over to New Orleans. So there may have been a day or so of rest for them, but if not, these guys are just jumping right back into the action, which is very exciting. So they're unloading off a boat. They've been joined by Snake Eyes, and Duke is there too. We know a few days have gone by because last we saw Duke, he was up at the pit. So it's definitely been a few days, and they board the this barge, which has the platform on it, and we get introduced to our main man, Shipwreck. There's no Polly inside, unfortunately, but we get Shipwreck, and he talks about all the bits and cleats, them odd-shaped hunks of iron you lovers keep tripping over and tying granny knots around. That's what was great. Those were parts of the actual toy. There were actual hooks that you could hook your dragonflies to. I just think it's fantastic. And then Larry using it as character stuff to build for this guy to say, this is a real sailor. This guy's really a naval dude. He's kind of got an attitude about it. He doesn't like people who aren't naval to be on his boats, on his ships, things like that. He probably would have hated it that I just called anything a boat. All that is just great, and it comes through so perfectly in this. And we see, of course, that the dragonflies can carry a platform.
Yo, Joe!
First scene is a classic bit of storytelling. You see it on TV, you see it in comic books all the time, and it's so smart. So the last scene that we saw on the previous page were the 2 helicopters carrying away the platform, right? So they've got their winches on it, and they're whooping away. Then the first panel here, it's so brilliant. It's not the exact same angle of the shot, but it's actually telling that it's the different angle because it kind of tells you where they're at in relation to it. But it is the same shot of the 2 helicopters carrying the platform, but this time it's in a set of crosshairs and it's bracketed by a thing. So it immediately puts you at an outsider perspective. It just tells you that someone not a part of the group that you were previously being the story told through. There's someone else that's involved in the story, and they're watching it from afar. They could be good, they could be bad. There's no judgment call on that, but it sets up. There's an element in play here narratively that the other party most likely does not know about, and it's great. It's a super cool storytelling trick. I love it when they use it, and I love seeing it here. Of course, that group's Cobra. They're riding around in a submarine. I always wish they would have done like a real Cobra submarine. That would have been really dope. Probably would have just had kids, just submerging it and ruining it the entire time. But I think that would have been kind of awesome. I mean, we had the shark. The shark was meant to go underwater. Why no Cobra submarine? I want answers, people. But this is great. There's a little bit of recap. A lot of times when we check in with Cobra, a lot of it ends up being either recap for the scheme of the day, because that tends to drive the narrative action, or it's the kind of like Shakespearean drama of who's trying to kill who within the ranks of Cobra. Those are like the 2 big check-ins that we get. Lately it's been the patricide stuff with Billy and his dad and stuff. And this one is more about the plans, because we have to check in. We had Tomac and Zaymot had that master planner, Crimson Guardsman, and they're still hinting about this giant plan in the port of New Orleans.
Yo, Joe!
So now we reach the Gulf, and there's this docking collar, this kind of floating collar, and that's going to support the platform while they get it moored to these prefabbed struts. Like it's actually it's the same size as like an existing oil rig, so they can just kind of couple up to existing offshore oil platforms. Of course, the toy just had their own expandable sea legs. It makes a little more sense here to just kind of go, yeah, those legs can't really go all the way to the bottom and moor it safely. But what's awesome is, one, we get a little bit of tripwire here. We get Doc is back. We get Snow Job never changing it from his snow clothing. Torpedo's there. Cutter's there. Gung Ho never gets a day off. He's back to work. Torp's going into the water to kind of oversee the coupling. And at the very bottom, we see a little Exxon, like sunken, broken piece of their oil platform it looks to me, because there is a lot of garbage on the floor of this ocean, it's a little bit of a statement. And the ocean, frankly, looks murky, that polluting, it's kind of a conservationist message here. Very subtle, very unspoken, but it's there if you want to look at it and read it, that water is filthy and the oil companies are responsible for it. So I like that a lot.
Yo, Joe!
Now this is awkward, and I guess you could no, this is awkward. This is a mistake. This is just a straight mistake, guys, because yeah, hold on. This is a mistake. So what we're looking at this page, if you guys know for sure, last issue, it 100% was Duke and Lady J. They were interrogating Candy, and we learned this issue that her dad's last name is Appel, Appell, which I know on previous episodes of Joe and Joe, when I've talked about this, I've had, I forget who reached out to me, but God bless you for it. One of my listeners was like, hey, dude, you're calling her Candy Southern. That's from X-Men. That was like Candy was Warren Worthington's girlfriend in the X-Men. I'm like, oh my God, you're totally right. It's too many Candies. This is Candy Appel. But in the previous issue, in 39, it 100% was Duke grilling her. Like Duke and Lady J, they were, asking her whereabouts of her dad and all that stuff, right? And then 2 pages earlier, we see Duke is on this new platform, which is fine, okay. Except back at the pit, Candy's still getting interrogated, and now it's not Duke, it's Hawk. And it looks like it's Hawk and CoverGirl. And CoverGirl, in the previous issue, she was on the plane that was taking the guys from Rio Lindo to the port of New Orleans for that mission. So there's a mix-up here. And just going to say that it looks to me like it was caught in the inking stage. And that is why Hawk/Duke is so heavily inked on this, because he's not named, right? No one calls him Hawk. When last we saw Hawk, he was kind of handing over the reins to Duke, so he was going to actually disappear from the book for quite a bit. And he really does have Duke's haircut. So I think this was drawn as Duke, and then it was caught at some point in the game, a little bit down the road, and they just kind of said, oh no, we'll just make that be Hawk. Just going to venture a guess on that, because it is the continuation of the Hawk stuff. And as far as why Lady J's hair changes a little bit, she looks a little more like CoverGirl. She could be Lady J, I guess. It looks a little too long to be Lady J. I don't know. Either way, there's some questionable casting here in this scene, but it's great. And we see that they're still holding Buzzer, and Buzzer takes a shine to Candy, etc. And it's a little more plot lifting here, some narration of exactly what they were doing. We were holding these guys prisoners, but we find out that the fun time's over, and the Joes cannot keep Buzzer as prisoner this whole time because they don't have the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, we're checking back in with Cobra, and we see that their submarine is actually going into the Arbco Star, which is a ship out of Liberia. and it is a sunken Cobra ship, probably most likely purposely sunk there. I mean, of course it's purposely sunk there because it's their underwater Cobra base. It's like kind of like a mobile base thing, right? And we meet the lampreys, which are the hydrofoil pilots for the first time. So we've seen the hydrofoils. We saw them a couple issues ago. Remember when the killer whale, it's that issue with the whale on the cover with guns blazing and they circled the atoll a bunch and they were fighting the hydrofoils? Well, now we get introduced to the lampreys, the hydrofoil pilots here. And they look really good. They look really sharp. The coloring's a little bit off from the toy, but the design is pretty much spot on with that X-shaped life preserver on them, the face visor and stuff. They look pretty tight.
Yo, Joe!
And now we get more and more character stuff for Shipwreck. This is great. Like, everyone's exhausted from putting this platform together, and he's not having any of it. Like, they've got to hose and swab the deck, chip some paint. Like, this is great Shipwreck to me. This is absolutely perfect Shipwreck. The only thing missing is Polly in my personal heart of hearts. And we get a little name check with the flag, and we get introduced to Barbecue for the first time. Barbecue is the G.I. Joe fireman, of course, and Shipwreck is being this consternation showing that it's a combat unit. We don't need a fireman. And that's what everyone says till their house is on fire. The Viper's coming. Let's only hope the Viper is not far behind. I love the look on Shipwreck's face. It's great. Like, as he's clutching the papers. And what's great is this. I don't think Shipwreck's necessarily in charge of anything around here. He's just, because they're on the ocean, he's taking charge. And he's upset because no one else is kind of listening to him. I think that's what's happening here. It's pretty great.
Yo, Joe!
Now, this is the kind of like plot movement that I love, that Larry did a lot. And he like never wasted time with stuff. It was the rare plot thread that went unused, certainly. And in this case, Buzzer is, he's gonna make his escape as they get escorted off of Fort Wadsworth. He's in a U.S. Army bus with Candy and a couple of MPs. But like, their storytelling is very economical. There's not a lot of bloat in these stories. He like gets right to it. And in the span of a page, they leave Fort Wadsworth. He says some terrible things to Candy to rile her up, frankly. And when she gets up, unknowingly helping him, he makes a break for it, chokes out the one MP, sends the other one through the windshield, and steals the show. Like, in one page. It's pretty capable stuff.
Yo, Joe!
And now we get the first real inklings of what Cobra's up to, with Candy's dad explaining to the reader, but kind of rehashing it for Cobra Commander and Destro, or Zartan and Zaymot and Tomax. And we see that there's this bunker. It's a fortified bunker, and it's underwater, and it's concrete steel. Like, it's hardcore bunker, and it's got a bunch of satellite dishes and weaponry and stuff on it. Then they've got the air-sea base in the middle, which I think they say it's somewhere here. They say it's about 50 miles away. And then there's these cargo containers that they're releasing from the boat that they're hiding under. So these are all like pieces of their puzzle that are coming into play, right? So they release these cargo containers. They're floating to the surface. We also see that he does not really care that much for his daughter. Not that he's against her, but she's not going to get in his way of Cobra domination, even if the Joes do have her. And he turns on this sonic weapon. It's emitting all these sounds into the Gulf, which, as we see on the next page, is going to start killing all the fish.
Yo, Joe!
And it's at a frequency that's starting to vibrate everything, including Snowjob's fillings. So we know a little bit about his dental hygiene. And just tons of dead fish start floating to the surface. Like, that's massive. And here it is, where Duke says they're a good 50 miles away. So that's a lot of marine life. So the Joes, they got to hustle. It is a great shot. Snake Eye's in action. Basically, everyone's in action. They're all running for the killer whale. But it's just an awesome, like, battle-ready shot of everyone heading to it. And the whale takes off to head towards the 50 miles where the sound is coming from, and they're going to raise the flag and try to get some air support.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, part 2 of the plan is those boxes hit the surface, and in those boxes were the Cobra hydrofoils. So the hydrofoils take off, and they're going to encounter the killer whale on the way. And they're moving so fast that it's like the whales are standing still. I like the upgrade here that we get in this whole issue, because if you think about it, when they were piloted in the other issue, yes, they were super fast and stuff, but the Joes were able to figure them out and take them out. But it's almost as if now that they have the dedicated pilots on them, the Lampreys, now the hydrofoils are like a real force to be reckoned with, because they really are. They do quite a bit of damage in this issue. A lot more. They're a lot more formidable than they were in their previous appearance. In fact, they're moving so fast, Tripwire thinks they were low-flying jets.
Yo, Joe!
And they waste no time. I mean, obviously they span 50 miles pretty quickly, but they just get right to it, and they start just tearing up the air-sea platform, like just absolute blowing it to heck. And it's a great shot. It's a little obscured by all the explosions, but I mean, that's the point. They're blowing it to hell. You get missiles hitting it. You get the automatic gun getting torn up. The helicopter landing pad gets blown in half, and we get to see barbecue. There's a lot. So basically, there's a lot of toyeticness. This is another one of those issues that really utilizes all parts of the toy. We're going to see something else really cool in a minute. But you get like the missiles getting launched off the boats. You get the automated guns from the platform in use. Then you get barbecue hack off that burning wreckage before it ignites the ammo, because remember, barbecue came with that axe, so we had to highlight the fact that his action figure came with an axe and what you would do with it. I don't know if it was like specifically the directive was, you don't use the axe to hit people, you don't chop people up, you do it to like put out fires, but either way, that's the use of it. Now here's a question. So let's see, Snake Eyes was a part of the crew that was heading, and actually they drew him jumping onto the killer whale on the previous page. But on this page, Snake Eyes is still on the thing. So apparently Snake Eyes jumped on the whale, saw that they were good, and then jumped back off the whale and stayed on the platform.
Yo, Joe!
He is a magical ninja, everyone. He is a magical ninja, never let it be said. Now, over at the whale, this is a little bit of I don't know about this part, but we have the shark, which is in and of itself its own. Yes, it's a one-man submersible flying machine, but it is apparently in this iteration small enough, or the whale is large enough to house itself within the belly of the whale, and it ejects from it. That's a little crazy town. I'm not so sure I'm on board with that concept. But for the sake of fun, that's awesome. So they were hiding a shark inside of a whale, and he comes popping out, and he's going to dive below the water to check out. They find they've reached the base, so they're going to check out the source of the sound waves and stuff. However, we see on the very bottom panel, the Cobras are happy about this. Appel he's excited that they've finally done this.
Yo, Joe!
This line of dialogue from Roadblock is something that stuck with me for years. Like, it still does, because I use it in video games. I use it like if you were playing like dodgeball or whatever, like in real life, like where you had to tag someone out. I honestly absolutely remembered this of, don't try aiming. They're way too fast for that. Lay down a field of fire and let them run into it, which is a very solid video game technique if you're trying to play something like, let's say, the game Centipede, where the centipede's going back and forth, or Space Invaders, right? You don't try to catch it if it's too fast for you. You wait for it to run into your fire. You stay where you're at, and it will eventually run into your fire. I absolutely promise you, I remembered this panel and this technique from this issue of G.I. Joe. It's great. The other amazing panel from this page, this is a great page, actually. This is a really strong page. Between Roadblock, the explosion in the top right, Doc heading into the thick of it to help his buddies. Snowjob and Ripcord got hit. This bottom panel of Shipwreck, those blasted Cobras are tearing my base apart, and then Barbecue responding with, no, they're shooting holes in it and setting it on fire. I'm the one who's tearing apart. I love that. I've always loved this. This is a fantastic panel. Speaking of the Watchmen and Tales of the Black Freighter, this is the kind of panel, the way this is colored and drawn and stuff, this is like a panel out of Tales from the Black Freighter, guys. If you're reading along with me, check that panel out, and you absolutely will know what I'm talking about. It is absolutely done up like those old horror war pirate comics.
Yo, Joe!
Now we see the shark is dropping some. They're shooting some missiles. I guess torpedoes would be the proper terminology. Shipwreck. The whale has dropped some depth charges. They're trying to blow up this the concrete bunker. Nothing's cutting it. Like it just ain't happening. Meanwhile, we do check in on Hawk at the pit. It is Hawk for sure. And he says that they're talking about using a nuke on the area because either way, if Cobra kills all the fish, it's devastating. And if we don't stop them, we got to stop them somehow. And I'm not sure, because this wasn't something that I've been kind of looking for, but for some reason, I think this might be the first mention of a nuclear weapon in G.I. Joe. And I'm serious. I really think this might. I don't recall any other mentions, but they talk about using a tactical nuke here. I don't really recall if this is the first mention of like a real world mention, like of an actual nuclear weapon. Most things have just been bombs and various Cobra devices and plans and stuff. But I think this might be the first use of nuclear. I don't know if I'd bet money on that. If you guys can remember it in another previous issue, please let me know. Let me know on Twitter at Joe and Joe Pod.
Yo, Joe!
So now we check in the battle platform. It's completely ravaged, and the lampreys are just circling, as they say, circling for the kill. They're getting cocky, but Barbecue has an idea, and he uses the only thing on the toy, which I love this toy, that's actually literally not a weapon, and it's the giant hook, and he happens to hook one of the boats, one of the hydrofoils, thus using it like a tether and slamming it into the platform, thus stopping the one attack.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, in this like really serious moment on the flag, and what's cool is the flag was name checked earlier, so when we check in on this here, it's not completely out of the blue. This is the first time we've seen the flag this issue, but Cutter talked about it before. This is scary. I've never loaded one of these babies on for real before, and then we're even. And the way they draw Ace is awesome. He's just heavily in shadow. I've never dropped one. Like Ace is going to drop a nuclear weapon. Like that's crazy time. We see the hydrofoil. It crashes into the platform. Barbecue just jumps into the fray. And I like this bit here where it's Doc that comes up with the idea, because you guys remember in the cartoon, it was Doc that was always solving the problems in the first few seasons in the miniseries. Like Doc was the one who figured it out because he was the smartest guy. He was the smartest member of the team that they had, of the roster that they had. So he was the medical doctor, but he was solving all these scientific problems that I was like, really? Would the doctor be the one to figure out the right frequency for these laser modulators? I feel like that would have been someone else's purview. But at the time, that's the only guy they had, so it made perfect sense. And so this is shades of that. And whether it was intended or not, I love it.
Yo, Joe!
Now this is where we get some really great toyetic stuff. Shipwreck jumping off the platform onto the hydrofoil, and he's about to bash the lamprey's face in, and he's using the rope the rope thing. I don't even know what that's called. The rope thing that Shipwreck came with. The little diamond studded rope cleat. I guess it was a cleat that the Shipwreck toy came with that everyone lost and is now valuable on the collector market. That's what he uses to bash this guy's face in, just like they had Barbecue using his axe. They make sure they use all pieces of the toy buffalo, so to speak. And then we get the final, we get the idea of what Doc's idea is, right? That a kiloton is equal to 1,000 tons of TNT.
Yo, Joe!
And meanwhile, back on the flag, we got it's the whole like last minute rescue. Like, hold on, unhook it. We got new orders. So that's it's just wonderful pacing, and it's like it's adding this tension to an already tense moment, and it's just really smart storytelling, very economical storytelling, where now they have to replace that nuke, which we just got a glimpse of, and you don't need a lot to deal with the nuke. Like that in and of itself is such a danger to everything and such a last resort. You don't need to spend pages and pages on it. You just literally had 2 panels to go, oh boy, this is a bad idea. So now we can go in and you cut that tension by going, oh, wait, we got a better idea. And you think, oh, okay, yeah, the Joes solved the problem. Of course, Cobra probably wanted them to drop a nuke and ruin the bay forever, thus blah, blah, blah. No, the Joes are going to solve it with just a bunch of bombs.
Yo, Joe!
Tripwire marks the area with a flare. That doesn't feel too accurate in the ocean because I think there's so much sway and movement in the ocean that marking it with a flare, I don't know how much that would actually, how much that would work, like how accurate those bombs would be. I feel like they really should have been some kind of like GPS thing, I guess Deep Six should have shot it with a tracer dart or something so that the planes could honed in on it. But either way, it's with a flare, and frankly, the flare stuff, it makes for a more dramatic visual for sure. Absolutely, for sure. And it's good looking. I like this final panel a lot. The detail on it by Wiggum is great, man. The Sky Striker looks gorgeous. It's got great perspective. You're over the shoulder of one of the Sky Strikers. You see all the bombs. They're all going into that vanishing point perspective where the flare was. It's visually, a flare is the right thing to use for this moment, but I feel like they would have missed.
Yo, Joe!
And all these bombs kind of just sink to the bottom of the ocean, so they're all going to collect around this base that's putting out this sound. And we also see that the hydrofoil gets taken off. Shipwreck dragging the lifeless body of a lamprey. That's exciting. I like that. That's the camera showing that. There's no commentary on it. It's just, oh yeah, Shipwreck knocked that dude out. But that last hydrofoil, it is getting away. And as they're kind of finishing up this battle and licking their wounds, this giant, mushroom cloud appears in the distance. This great big ba-boom.
Yo, Joe!
And it's just a massive explosion over the ocean, and it's on a fault line. And we see that Duke says the sensors show tremors on the ocean floor. We've aggravated a fault line. And we get the final panel. The Tomac Zaymot are shaking each other's hands. And Professor Appel says, it worked. We've tricked the Joes into blowing up the fault line. And the answer is next issue. That's the cliffhanger, kids. That is awesome. What just masterful storytelling. You think they figured it out. You think, oh, okay, they're going to blow it up. It's just, Cobra just wants to hurt some fish. And then it turns out, no, it's not hurting fish at all. There's a bigger issue. And you got to come back next month to find out what it is. Guys, I love it. I love this. I love doing these issues. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. Remember to go to patreon.com/JoeOnJoePod. Check it out. See if you want to help support the show and get access to the rest of the issues. And so now you're Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.